So thanks for joining, everyone. Like I said, it's Thursday, May 28th, 4 o'clock. This is this week's Real Talk. We've got a couple of great things to go over this week. We've got Howard Tavroges here, who's a paralegal, to talk about landlord and tenant issues. He represents landlords, and we know that there's going to be a lot of landlords, investors, and tenants on this call who might have some questions. And then we'll also go over a quick market update and some of the things that have happened over the last few weeks in the market and where we might see things going. You've got some of the Mulholland Ross group on today's call. We've got Lauren Rhodes and Davis Mulholland, as well as Jack Ross. You guys want to say hi quickly, and then we'll jump in.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to have you.
All right, so without further ado, we'll let Howard take it away. And Howard, if you can introduce yourself, just kind of give us a quick overview of what you do, and then we'll jump into some of the questions that we've had sent to us ahead of time.
Perfect. So as I was introduced, my name is Howard Tavroges. I'm a paralegal. I only represent landlords all across Ontario, but I'll tell you a little bit about my history as far as the legal system. I worked for a legal clinic for 8 years, and I was tenant duty counsel for 6 of those 8 years, which means I was the guy on the other side representing tenants. So in that time frame, and I only know this because Legal Aid Ontario, everything's statistics, I represented over 15,000 tenants. And then 6.5 years ago, I went into private practice, and literally all I do 24/7 is represent landlords all across this lovely province, except since March 19th, when everything became closed. And I'm still busy, working out of home like most people, but it's been closed since then. And that's basically what I do. So my knowledge definitely is in residential tenancy. I know the Residential Tenancies Act pretty good, and all about the landlord and tenant board. So any questions anybody has, I'd be more than happy to answer. So
that's great. Yeah, we have a few questions that were sent to us ahead of time.
Yeah.
So the first one is, I mean, obviously with the pandemic going on, there's tenants that have lost their jobs and have had issues with being able to afford rent. And so it's a question of, if a tenant can't pay rent or hasn't paid rent over this last couple months with everything that's going on, what happens? Can tenants not pay rent right now? Or, what are their choices?
So that's a bone of contention, if you want to put it in that context, is the province has implemented what they call a no eviction policy since March the 19th, which means there is no evictions. The board is not sitting, which means they're not having hearings, and they're not issuing eviction notices, and also the sheriff has been closed since March the 19th. So even if you had an eviction order, which a lot of landlords had prior to, they can't enforce them because there's nobody there to enforce them. So they have to wait till the courts open up. So in answer to your question about rent, well, rent is still due. And this crisis really started, mid-March, but basically April 1st was the first month that most people were kind of missing rent. And I always tell landlords, you know what, your tenants better than anybody else. If you can work with them, if they do have issues, and a lot of tenants may have issues. They've lost their jobs, like a lot of people, or they've been laid off. They may still be getting the $2,000 from the government, but it's not enough. They have to feed their families and everything else. And each person has a different situation. But if you know your tenants really well, and it's more of a game that they're playing, and I put game in quotation marks, you know what? If they aren't willing to negotiate with you, like, pay me a bit of money, let's say the rent is $1,500. And they say, look, I can only pay $500, $750, $1,000. Take that money and try and work with them, because, it's a relationship, landlord-tenant relationship. It's not quite like a marriage, but it's like a marriage. And, they're your responsibility, and their responsibility to you is to pay the rent and take care of your rental property, whether it be an apartment, a house, or whatever, a condo. But they are responsible to pay the rent. So if they're not willing to discuss anything with you, and I always say, issue an N4. And I don't know if everybody knows what an N4 is, but that's basically the first step in trying to get your money back, or through the legal process. So the N4 gives them, if it's served personally, 14 days, or if it's served by mail, 19 days, in which to pay all the money that's owed. So if they don't pay it, you can go the next step and file an L1 application with the board and get in the queue for a hearing. Now, I strongly suggest to do that, and you may upset tenants and they say, well, I'm trying to work with you. And you say, you know what? I'm just covering myself. This is a business and everybody has to look at being a landlord as a business. It is a personal relationship, but it is a business. So you know what? Serve the N4, file the L1. The L1, you can e-file it through the landlord and tenant website. Costs you $175. And if by the time it eventually ever gets to the board for a hearing and the tenant pays all the money, well, you can cancel the hearing, no big deal. But if you don't start the process now, well, you're going to be so far down the queue, as I had mentioned prior to you opening up the meeting, there's literally tens of thousands of files that have been adjourned and a lot of files that have been being processed, but nothing's happening. They haven't scheduled anything, and hearings are scheduled all the way through August already. So who knows when those hearings are going to take place. So if you don't start the process now and you wait until the board opens up, you're going to be way, 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 way back until you actually get a hearing.
So really, I'm hearing you say, you do have to treat it like a business. Obviously, trying to work with the tenants is the best thing at the beginning. Seeing what can be worked out or what they can afford to do, if anything. But if you just have tenants who say, well, there's mortgage rebates, so why should I pay you rent? And I'm not going to pay you rent. You need to start the process and cover yourself as a landlord, really.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's true.
Okay, that's fair. Another question that we had that came in is in regards to landlords who have students in their properties right now. So a lot of the bigger universities and colleges have just announced that their fall semester will be online only, and they're still not sure what's going to happen in the winter semester even. So I guess the question that this person sent in was, if you have students on a one-year lease right now who say, well, I just found out University of Windsor is not going to be doing classes in the fall. I want to break my lease. I want out of my lease. What can a landlord do? What happens in that scenario if they're on a lease? Can they break it?
Well, you can't really break a lease. But what happens is if the tenants or the students move out, who are technically tenants, they've left the rental unit. So what process can you take? I mean, if they're still there, and most of them probably aren't, they probably all moved back home. But see where you are in the process as far as have they paid rent? Still serve the N4. Still go after them for the money in these months, and be honest with them. And look, I have a daughter that's going to university, so I understand. But you have to, under law, still do your due diligence and try to mitigate your losses, which means they've left. You have to still try and advertise, try to get somebody else in there. And if it's student housing, it's going to be difficult, but you may have other people, depending on the situation. I mean, if it's not a dorm, if it is around, a college or a university, you may be able to get somebody in there. What are they responsible for? Well, they're responsible for all the money up until the time that you re-rent it out. But, and I warn you about this, if you just kind of say, forget it, I'm going to let the lease run out and I'm not going to re-rent the place. Well, if you have to take them to court, and at that point, if they've abandoned the unit, you can't go through the landlord and tenant board anymore. You have to go through small claims court. And the first thing that the judge is going to ask you is, what did you do to mitigate your losses? And you're like, well, what do you mean? Well, did you advertise the unit? No. So you really didn't try to re-rent it out to anybody else? Well, no. Well, then you're going to lose. But, and in a lot of circumstances, again, with student housing, most landlords get their selves covered, where they get a guarantor on there, probably a parent. And if you can't get the money from the tenants, get it from the parents. But again, it's a unique situation because of the COVID-19. Try again, same idea. Try to work with them. Try to say, look, you know what? I've got a last month's rent deposit, and it depends where they are in the process. Like if they're already out 2-3 months, well, you should try and go after them. I mean, if they're still in your unit. But like I said, if they're out, really the only avenue is small claims court, and you really can't do anything in small claims court until you know how much money you've lost. You can't say, okay, the lease ends a year from now. Well, you can't say, okay, I'm going to file with small claims court and go after a year. You've got up to 2 years to file with small claims court. But I warn you, it is a long, long process through small claims court. It actually makes the landlord and tenant board pale in comparison for time of processing. Small claims court, it may take a year or more. And remember, they're under the same situation as the landlord and tenant board where they've been closed since March. So they're going to have a backlog of cases also. So yeah, try and work with them and say, look, I've got a last month's rent deposit. I'll use it for, let's say, it's May that they owe. I'll use it for the month of May right now. If I can't re-rent it out for the month of June, I'm going to make you responsible for that amount. Are you okay with that? Well, if they say no and they've moved out, there's really nothing you can do. I mean, again, do everything you can, advertise, try to mitigate your losses. And every time you put an ad in there, however you advertise, whether it's through a real estate agent or through Kijiji, which I don't suggest to go through Kijiji, but that way to advertise, keep track of it, put something on your computer just to keep it, just in case you want to go through small claims. But if your losses are not great, like if, let's say you've only lost $1,000 or $2,000, not, making that it's a little bit amount of money, but it's just not worth it to go through small claims court. It's just a big hassle. But if it's a big amount of money, or another way, if they're still in there, you can still file an application with the landlord and tenant board until they vacated the rental unit. I know it sounds confusing, but.
Okay. And so another question that's come up is, let's say you've served them the notice that they haven't paid rent, and now you filed the application with the landlord tenant board.
Yeah.
In terms of eviction, you were saying they can't be evicted right now. So essentially they could remain in the unit.
Yep.
And still not pay you rent until the landlord tenant board opens and they process your application and you get the hearing.
Well, get the hearing, not only get the hearing, but as I was saying is, not only they've been closed since March 19th, so is the sheriff. And all across Ontario, depending which area you're in, but most areas it takes, even you have an eviction order from the board and the tenant is still there, they haven't left, even though, yeah, you got to leave by this date. Well, they give them so many days in which to pay the arrears up to that point. And then by the next day, you have to file it with the sheriff, which costs you another $350. So it's more money out the window. And then because COVID-19, because the sheriff's been closed, well, normal process at a sheriff all across Ontario has been anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks after that. So add on all the people that are waiting in the line to now take all those orders to the sheriff. So if it was 3 to 6 weeks before, I couldn't even imagine what it's going to be like going to the sheriff. I feel really bad giving them bad news, but I prefer to be honest. I mean, it's not an easy process. It's a long process. And that's why being a landlord, sometimes you kind of shake your head and go, is this what I really want to do? Because you have to have money in your pocket before you start, as opposed to, I know a lot of landlords do this. They say, okay, look, I've got a mortgage, the rent will pay the mortgage. If that's the way you're going to be a landlord, it's a scary proposition. And unfortunately, it's a losing proposition at this point. So yeah, there's no way to get them out at this point. And again, I'm sorry to make it a long answer, but I want to make it as thorough as possible so people really understand the situation. It is difficult. And yeah, if you have a good tenant in there, that's great. If you don't, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do.
So I guess to kind of jump off what you were just saying then, do you have any advice or recommendations for new investors who are looking at, purchasing property in the next little bit and becoming landlords, or who are currently landlords and maybe acquiring more property based on things you've seen obviously in your current career and even with the pandemic right now? Is there anything that you could think of as, big recommendations?
So, okay, so that's like a 3-4 prong answer, like most of my answers. Anyway, so let's say you're investing in a property and say, I want to rent it out. I do a lot of speaking engagements, and this is what I always recommend to people. They may look great on paper, and a lot of people look great on paper. They have good credit rating, they've got a great solid job, but I always say, meet them in person. And they're like, no, but meet them in person. Because, and let me back up a bit, and not only you meet them in person, I don't know if somebody's investing by themselves, bring a friend, bring a spouse, bring somebody with you to that meeting. And first impressions are really important. If the tenant comes to the meeting and they're dressed in sweatpants and it looks like they just got dragged out of bed to show up, and they're doing you a favor to be there, and when you're talking to them and they're not looking you straight in the eye, they look kind of shifty. If one of the two of you says, my spidey senses say they don't look like a good fit, don't do it, because once they become a tenant, it's a long time to get them out. So even if you have to lose 1 or 2 months worth of rent, to get the perfect tenant. And look, it's not an ironclad way of vetting out tenants, but that's number one. But if it's already tenanted, and hopefully the tenants that are in there, because if you purchase a property where it's tenanted already, they're in a lease, then you have to maintain the tenancy at some point. Well, hopefully they're still good tenants. Or, if you want a clean house, and it's not that easy, depending on how many units, if it's a single family or multi-residential, you might look at, I want to start the slate clean. And depending what the rent is too, because that's an important factor, because if they've been in there a really long time and the rent, is based on the raises by the landlord and tenant board, which is average 1.8, 2.2%, they're not at market rent. So you might look at either buying them out, or as they say, cash for keys, and starting all anew with new tenants. But if they have been good tenants, they've been there a long time, well, it is still a good investment because, look, most people, I guess, on this call are real estate agents or in the real estate business. It's real solid investment anyways, and it's going to go up and hopefully still go up. So yeah, still go down that road, but be really careful. And as I said before, run it like a business. If you think they're going to be your buddies, whatever, yeah, it's good to have a good one-to-one relationship with your tenants, but it's a business. Don't let them take advantage of you. Be proactive, not reactive. And what I mean by that is, something comes up, take care of it right away. Don't wait. Take care of it.
Okay, great. And I see a question here from Gerald. I'm not sure if I quite understand the question. He says, how about approaching mortgagors? And I think, Gerald, if you want, you can unmute yourself if I get it wrong, but I think you're asking in terms of the mortgage deferral plans that the banks and lenders have been offering, the 6-month mortgage deferrals. And I know we did talk about it on a previous call. There's pros and cons to it. Our mortgage broker, Raki, from the Mortgage Savvy team kind of addressed that on the previous call. It really depends on your personal situation. It's not like you're getting that money for free. It's just being added on and you're paying interest on it in your mortgage in the long run. So it really comes down to your current situation. Are you getting any money from the rental or not? Do you absolutely need the funds? And so it's really a case-by-case basis on that. So I hope that answers that, Gerald. If anyone else has any questions, either from the team or for Howard, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or type it in the box.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Howard, I know you mentioned, for landlords that are really in a pickle, they have a tenant that is refusing to pay and they're kind of, for whatever reason, and kind of the best advice would be to kind of get into that queue and wait your turn in terms of when the board comes back. Can you give us an idea of what that queue looks like, just from your perspective? Are we getting an overwhelming amount of landlords, or what's that? What do you think in terms of time frame?
So time frame, I can't even estimate, but I'll give you an idea. So before COVID-19, there was a crisis at the Landlord and Tenant Board where they've been really short on adjudicators. And this happened a little over 2 years ago when they had the election. So just prior to that, the old government wasn't hiring new adjudicators. And the adjudicators are the judges at the Landlord and Tenant Board. That's just their name. That's what they're called. And then it became a real crisis where it was down 27 to 35 across the province. So it was taking a really long time to get a hearing date, as I explained before. But because of COVID-19, from my inside information that I found out, there's probably anywhere from 10 to 12,000 applications that have been adjourned. That's number one. Number two, since then,
Ontario-wide.
landlords have been applying since then, online or email, or not email, but via fax to the Landlord and Tenant Board. So they're basically at this point, and I hate the word that they use, they're stockpiling applications. It's like, you can imagine what it looks like when it comes in. There's just piles and piles of applications. They may give you a file number and take your, whether it's $175 or $190, depending how you file the application, and they're just sitting there until they get the okay from the not the federal government, but the provincial government to say, okay, you guys can now open up, and now you can go ahead with hearings. But from my understanding is, again, from a little bit of information I've gotten, and I hope it's correct, that they're going to go to different ways of conducting hearings, like via telephone, via, what we're doing now with Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. And that's probably the easiest, quickest way to process these applications, because if they don't, they're never, ever going to catch up. It's just way too many applications. But as your question, you should get in the queue. How long it's going to be, I really don't know. I mean, to protect themselves, they better get this stockpile down really quickly, or there's going to be like riots, in Toronto, at the provincial government, right? Like, what the hell are you guys doing?
Wow.
People are losing their homes. I mean, they're losing their investments, and that's what's going to happen. You're going to, and again, because most of you are in the real estate business, you're going to have a lot of people saying, look, we need to sell the property. We just can't afford it anymore because we're so much in arrears of rent, and it's going to happen too much, which is sad because, you use it as an investment, but people are losing out because of this COVID-19. Does that answer your question? In sort of way? I really can't
It
give
does, yeah. And I guess
right?
oh no, I
Yeah.
appreciate that for sure. And I guess my follow-up question would be, because we're familiar with the mortgage deferrals, and
Okay.
we understand that it's hard to apply for an income property, and some banks aren't even providing that relief for income properties. I guess my question would be, is that kind of adding to the pain, or are a lot of your applicants unable to receive the mortgage relief?
Are you talking about the landlords? Yeah. Yeah, again, exactly what you're saying. It depends what bank they bank with. Some are allowing it, and other people, they say, same idea. It's a smooth process. Other people saying, you know what, I'm basically, pardon my French, screwed because bank won't defer it. I can't pay the mortgage, and I'm going to lose the property. And I get like these desperate calls, and people call me up and they say, oh my God, because, I looked at the landlord and tenant website, and they say, emergency situations, they'll conduct these hearings. That's just a bunch of BS. They're not conducting any hearings. The only hearings for emergency situations are that, if somebody's killed somebody else in the unit, and I'm not being sarcastic, but it's true, that's what they call an emergency situation, or trafficking drugs, etc., then they have an emergency hearing. Well, they have the hearing via telephone, and then it's not a one-step process because the province has implemented this no eviction policy. You have to actually, if you get the order from an adjudicator via the telephone hearing, you have to file now with the Superior Court to have not one, but two judges sign off on that in order for a sheriff to come out and evict. And from the information I've heard from a few people, it's not a win-win situation. It's a very long process because judges are reluctant to, as they say, kick people out on the street. So it's very, very difficult. So,
Yeah.
And again, I'm sorry to be pessimistic on it, but I just want people to understand it's not easy. I mean, still investing in real estate and landlord and tenant, it's still an amazing investment. And I call it, my analogy, the 90-10 rule. So 90% of tenants are great, 10% aren't. And 90% of landlords are great and 10% aren't. So it kind of goes both ways. And if you're stuck, unfortunately, with the 10%, try to do what you can if you can try to buy them out. Because look, if it's going to be long-term, like you're waiting in the queue to get a hearing and you say, okay, look, right now I'm owed 2 months rent, but by the end of this, I might be owed 8 months rent. It's better to dig into your pocket right now and go to the tenant and say, look, I will give you, I'll waive the money that you owe me, and I'll give you an extra month when you exit. I'm just using that as an example. It may cost more, but try to negotiate to get them out because you need to get them out. I mean, if they're not paying, and they're playing games, it sucks. You have to go into your pocket to get money, but try and get them out, get them to sign what they call an N11 agreement to terminate, and use the money that you've got in your hand to say, okay, this is what you're going to get, but I only give you the money when I get the property back, like when you give me the keys, because otherwise they're never going to leave.
So Howard, I think I heard you say, and kind of the moral of the story is, especially for some of our investor clients that are on the call right now, is as a general rule, investing in real estate and getting rental properties is a great thing. And 90% of people, it's going to be a great experience. There might be, a few people here and there that might have some issues, but that's kind of life, right? I mean,
Exactly.
that's a general statement. So,
yeah, exactly.
And I'd like to say, if there was an issue, then they can reach out and call you and you'll help them.
Absolutely. And you know what? I encourage people, and I'm really weird this way. I mean, the weird part, you can just ask my wife and my daughter. They'll, verify the fact that I'm a little bit weird. I never, ever, ever charge people for phone calls, for, reaching out to me, whether it's via email, text, or phone call, because I prefer somebody gets an answer as opposed to, what, I think it's okay, but I really don't want to call, a legal professional because it's going to cost me money and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to still kind of like, I really hope this is right. And that's the problem too. So we were talking about the N4 before. That is one notice that most people unfortunately screw up on. And you don't even find out until you actually get to the board at the hearing and the adjudicator calls you up and says, hey, by the way, your notice is faulty. You're going to have to start the process all over again because we can't issue an eviction. And at that point, you want to kill somebody. So better you get the questions, nip it at the bud at the beginning. And obviously, if somebody needs to retain my services, that's great. I mean, that's wonderful. But if they have a question, please reach out to me. I actually encourage people to do that. I beg people to do that. And again, I know I'm different than most legal professionals, but I prefer, if you can handle it, you can do it yourself. Hey, here's what you need to do. Send me your forms. I'll review it. Go on your way. You'll be able to handle it. But if you can't, that's what I'm here for.
Well, great. So for any of our investor clients that are on the call right now, we're more than happy to help look at your purchases or your potential investments. And should you have any issues in the future, we'll put Howard's contact info in the chat box there. That way you can reach out to Howard with any issues there. Unless there's any other questions for Howard, I think we'll thank you so much for your time and let you.
I've got one.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jack.
I've got just one quick one. Howard, there's a lot of people right now in across all Ontario that have Airbnbs, and of course the short-term rental market is kind of shut down right now, right? So I'm fielding a lot of questions from people who are saying, okay, I'm going to go the route of having a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease, but I've only ever done the Airbnb thing. How do I protect myself?
Okay, so if you go into lease number 1, you have to use the new Ontario lease. That's been standard since April 30th, 2018. So make sure you get it. I mean, I know the ORIA when you have an offer to lease and stuff, but make sure that all that information is converted into a 1-year lease. All the details, and actually the Ontario lease, if everybody wants to go take a look at it, you can actually just Google it and say, Ontario lease. Make sure you say Ontario, Canada, because sometimes you get Ontario, California, but Ontario lease, and it gives you the links to open up. And it's pretty thorough, the lease itself, with the terms that you're saying 1 or 2 year. I would suggest to people, don't go a 2-year lease. I mean, if you want to lock them in, as they say, go a 1-year lease. And once the lease expires anyways, they become a month-to-month tenant. It's not like, automatically they're going to leave, but it kind of protects you for the year. I mean, if you feel comfortable, if these people have lived there a long time, or you know them really well, and you want to go longer term, that's fine. But, sign them into a lease. And it actually gives you the option, if you look at the Ontario lease, you can actually do it now where they can start off as a month-to-month tenancy. It doesn't mean all the terms are any different. It's still the same thing, still the same process in which to evict them through the landlord and tenant board. And, don't think that because their term is up that they have to leave. They don't have to leave. They're still going to be your tenant for a while until, you agree to leave, or they agree to leave, or you're moving back into the unit, or you sell the unit, etc. Those are ways of obviously ending the tenancy. But yeah, it's a good way, at least I'm sure when you go to the banks, they say, if you do have tenants in there right now, what's the rent that you're going to be charging, if it's, upper, lower level of a house, if it's a whole house, or if it's, like I said, residential, if it's like a triplex or a duplex, etc. Your bank's going to ask for that information, and they'd actually prefer, and also your insurance, that you have somebody in there in which to protect your property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
And if anybody has any more questions, reach out to me anytime. It's no problem.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Howard. We appreciate that, and all of our clients do appreciate that as well. And we'll be in touch should we have any issues.
Be well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, Howard.
Take
Thanks
care.
a lot, Howard.
You're welcome. Be well. Bye.
So I guess we'll jump into just a quick market update, and let me just share my screen here. Right, so this is just a couple quick things that our broker-based system, which is the system that's used to book a lot of the showings on properties. This is some stats that they've put out, and they're putting them out weekly, so we can get a really good snapshot of kind of where things are starting to go. I mean, obviously we can't predict the future, but at least we can kind of get an idea. This is appointments booked over the last 90 days. Obviously at the beginning, we were at the beginning of March here, and we were much higher. And then, you know, March 15th, 16th, 17th hit, and everything shut down, and we dropped significantly. The interesting thing is you can see from, you know, kind of March 31st up until last week, we've been on an incline, which is a great showing that, you know, there's been some more confidence in the market for people to get out and see more properties. The interesting thing that they pointed out is last week's high, which is this number here, 58.49, is pretty much around where we were at in terms of the lows pre-pandemic. So that's actually a really interesting sign to see that we're starting to get back up in there in terms of more, you know, more buyers getting out and seeing properties.
It also kind of, I was just going to add that it really shows you an idea of where we were at before COVID, right? That we were all feeling it. I know us four were feeling the market really heat up, right? It was going, showings were really picking up. So it really shows you that, yeah, it's interesting to take a look at.
Yeah, I mean, at that peak, you had, you know, almost 12,000 showings in 1 week. At the low, you know, we were down to under 1,000. So big difference for sure. But it's definitely a good sign to see that we're back, you know, almost up to 6,000 showings in a week. So definitely creeping back up there. This shows kind of an overlay of, turn off some of these, new listings and exclusive listings over the last 30 days. And again, you can see that it is starting to creep upwards on an upward trajectory. To give you guys some really interesting insight is this graph here. And this is week over week by the month. So this last week in May 18th to the 24th versus this week in April 20th to the 26th. And you can see that showings are up 105%. Offers being registered on properties are up over 100%. And new MLS and exclusive listings are both up around 50% each. And even solds are starting to go up as well. So we're definitely seeing some more momentum and more confidence. Obviously, it's hard to predict where things are going to go. And you know, as mortgage deferrals end and CERB payments end, we're not really sure where things will go. But it is a decent time right now, whether you're buying or selling, in terms of what we're starting to see these last few weeks even. And Davis or Lauren or Jack, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that from what you guys are seeing on the ground as well. But this is just some stats that we wanted to share. But definitely, if you guys have some updates as well from the field, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, well, I would just say that right now we definitely feel, and when we were having this conversation with sellers, is that there is still we saw that increase, but there is still a shortage of inventory on the market. And homes that are priced at a great price and aren't really fishing for over market value, they are selling quickly, and with foot traffic continuing, it looks great. Just driving through the streets, so we are seeing homes, especially these new builds, prep up. And when the weather's getting nicer and these openings are happening more throughout the province, it'll be interesting to see if we do see an influx of inventory. Those people that were hoping to be in the spring, now they're getting some optimism in terms of openings and all of that. So it's an interesting time, but right now I think it's a great opportunity in terms of lack of inventory, a lot of buyer foot traffic, and homes are selling. Yeah,
that's great. Jack, I know you're running with a few buyers even this week that have seen properties that, you know, 2-3 months ago would have had, you know, many multiple offers, and we're seeing them now without getting multiples. So for buyers, it's an interesting time. And for sellers that are pricing fairly, we're seeing those even sell quickly as well.
Yeah, you know what? That's the key, Jordan. It's the sellers who are priced well in the market that are getting a lot of attention. You're going to get a lot of showings in a week. You know, you're going to get a lot of phone calls from agents who want to know you know, the fine details about the home before they go in and see it. So you're right. The ones that are priced well, they generate a lot of attention and they sell pretty quickly. And that's definitely a trend that we're seeing continue. You know, it seems we're getting at least it feels like we're getting a few more phone calls from buyers who maybe are reading the same news as everybody else and kind of trying to get out in front of this and make sure that they can get into the market and still qualify for their mortgage while they're still employed. And so, you know, that's been interesting too. I think maybe the talk about the whole potential of raising your down payment from 5% to 10% maybe spooked a few people off the fences and into the market. So there's still a market. It's a different market, but you can still be successful in this market. And you know, depending on the neighborhood that you're in, it's worth taking a really close look at what's been going on.
And I think the real key of it all is, you know, right now the serious buyers and serious sellers are the ones that are out there, right? You know, the sellers who just want to try some crazy price for the sake of trying it, you know, might sit on the market, but serious sellers who, you know, price a property fairly are getting activity on their property. And, you know, serious buyers who see opportunity right now, you know, are submitting offers and getting properties, you know, at fair prices without having as much crazy competition as may have been, you know, in the spring markets of the past. I think one thing to remember too is, you know, at least our team is definitely taking all the necessary precautions to keep our buyers and sellers safe. You know, between virtual showings, qualifying buyers, qualifying, you know, the agents beforehand, and really making sure that only the really qualified people are the ones physically getting into the house, and that all the necessary, you know, COVID precautions have been taken to keep everyone safe right now. So unless anyone else has any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you know, type a question in, and we'll definitely get those answered. As well, be sure to like our Facebook page and our Instagram page, as we do put out a lot of really good updates and content throughout the week. We have our virtual open houses most weekends as well, and we do the Real Talk Thursdays at 4 p.m. Unless anyone else has any other questions, I think that's going to be it. Feel free to reach out to us either via phone or via email, 416-230-8500 or support@mulhollandross.com, or again through our Facebook or Instagram. Anyone else have anything they wanted to add, or we're good for today?
I think that's a wrap.
See you next week.
All right, well, stay safe out there, and we'll see everyone next week for Real Talk. Right,
We'll
thanks.
see you then.
Again, you can reach us at 416-230-8500 or support@mulhollandross.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day, guys. Right.